Hello and welcome to Clay to Canopy, the show where I attempt to make just about everything from the ground up. In today's episode, I am going to be making 2 more garden arbors to match the already existing 2 arbors that I have outside. My garden arbors are going to be resting in between where 2 of my beds come together. Last year we put in some spaghetti squash that we thought would be able to go over the ground, and we had these small A-frames that were up, but it was bad. The spaghetti squash grew all over the place. They were very prolific and I was really happy about that, but it kind of looked really janky, and it would have benefited from being able to grow up a little bit higher because the A-frames are pretty short. So I'm going to be adding 2 more of those arbors to our landscape out there. As I do that, I'm going to walk you through the process. The first thing I need to do is cut my 1x2s in half on a long rip on the table saw. This is a very risky cut, which is why I don't even have a jumpsuit on and my hair is up, because I want nothing to get in the way while I'm making these cuts. If you are going to be doing this at home and trying to do these cuts, please do not attempt to operate this machinery or do this cut if you are not very experienced with using the table saw. This is highly risky, especially with this particular wood. Because it is green wood, it's constantly moving. Furring strips are already really poor quality of lumber, which means there's going to be knots, there's going to be some weird warpage going on. So that also makes the cuts even more risky than usual versus you cutting a 1x2 that is like a select pine. But you can do the math, figure out which one works out to be the cheaper. If you feel comfortable making these cuts, then go ahead and do so, because it will save you a ton of money if you can. So I just went in and did a rubbing against the arbors I made last time, because I want to make sure that the top of my arbors match. I mean, you don't have to make a detailed header for the arbors. It could be just a straight board, but since I already went in and did that for the other 2 arbors, I want to make sure that the 2 new ones that I put in are identical. So what I did was I took some of this, it's basically drawing paper that I got on a roll from IKEA. I put it up against the existing arbor and just rubbed my hand around, and I have a very faint crease mark where I rubbed my finger just to get an impression. I'm now going to take a Sharpie and go back over that so that I have a visible template, and then I'm going to show you how I'm going to alter this template to change the size of the header, because these 2 new ones are actually shorter, so I'm going to have to make this a bit smaller. This part is my flat, so I'm just going to grab a straight edge. I left a decent amount of flat here in the center of this template so that I can either extend it to be longer or shorten it if need be. And in my case, this is actually going to have to be shorter. And if you can see it, there is this flat here at this end of the template on both spots, here and here. That actually is the spot where my 1x2 will be running up. So my measurement for width should fall from here to here. So however long I need this to be will be from the inside of this line to the inside of this line. So in my case, this is going to be the distance between bed to bed. Depending on the size of the arbor that you're building, you're going to need to be able to adjust this, and then the corresponding piece that goes on top will have to also be adjusted. I'm going to go ahead and cut this template out so I can transfer it to my piece of wood. Alright, so to transfer my template, first thing I'm going to do is fold it in half, and then I'm going to place my one edge nice and butted up to where I have this flat. So I should have a flat that meets here, and this flat that falls, actually it should hit the bottom, this side, and the top, because of the way that I cut this originally. So I'm going to first transfer the 1/2, and then I'm going to deal with figuring out the measurement. Alright, now I'm going to measure from here. I need the inside of my piece and the other side of the inside of the piece to be a certain distance. It's insanely hot today. I am forgoing the jumpsuit because I just can't deal. Okay, flipping this over. There are just situations that you have to forgo the technical of tracing things out, and thing like this, as long as it visually looks good, I don't care that it may be off a tiny bit. When it comes to even my furniture making, I like the sense of the hand being involved. If I wanted a piece of machined furniture, I could just go to a factory type of place that cranks things out and buy one of those. I mean, obviously I want to make sure that things are like a 90-degree angle if it's supposed to be a drawer that's fitted. I will be needing 4 of these, one for each side of the arbor, and I'm making 2 arbors. So I'm going to go ahead and cut up one of these, get it nice and sanded, and then use that as the template now to trace the others. I finished milling the strips, and now before I get to doing any of the major assembling, I want to paint all of my pieces first. So I have a long road of painting ahead of me. These pieces have been primed. I'm going to now go ahead and paint the red parts on these, but since I have the paint out, I'm also going to be painting up some extra pieces for some trellises that I'll be making, as well as these arbors. All of my parts have gone through their first round of the basic painting, and now it's time for me to cut up the pieces that I need, and I went out and remeasured. I'll go ahead and post the measurements I have for the arbors that I'm making, but keep in mind that I am trying to fit my arbors within a certain spacing. You could follow these measurements and then you'd end up with one that is about 7 feet high by 3 feet wide with a 3-foot walkway opening, but you can also expand this to be any width and dimension that you'd like. It does not have to go into the bed if you're going to build this arbor. You could most certainly just build one and sink it into the ground somewhere in the beginning of a walkway or something like that. I went ahead and I cut all of my parts for the 2 trellises, and it was almost 100 parts total. You know, when you're cutting that many parts, you get into a rhythm, yes, and you keep cutting and you cutting and you cut all one set. When I came to lay everything out, I realized that the cuts were just slightly off here and there. So to alleviate this problem, I bunched them together for each side that I need. The left side of the arbor, these are all my parts that I need for the left side. And as long as those parts are identical, even if they're slightly off by 1/8 of an inch for the other side, you're not really going to notice. But you will notice when you're putting together each individual side if they're off slightly. So to remedy this problem, I took some blue tape and then I just taped up the ends of my bunches. So for here, I have all of my 60-inch long pieces, and then I took a skim cut on my chop saw at each end to make sure that they are all landing at the same point. I was not taking off a lot. It was just to kind of even out all the pieces, because this is going to form a giant grid and it's going to be fitting together inside some of the larger 1x2s. You'll notice if they don't line up properly. You'll have, gaps where the screws land and things like that. I would not recommend you trying to do this on a table saw, even with a sled, because they're only taped together with some blue tape. So the table saw is much more aggressive than something like your chop saw, where you can actually control it starting and stopping if you feel resistant. Alright, once you've trimmed up the pieces, the next thing you're going to do is measure out your grid. I didn't even bother taking the tape off. It's going to be a lot easier keeping the tape on to do the measurements. My spacing is marked out at 6 inches apart. So the first thing I did was to find my center. I measured in 30 inches from each side, put a tick mark on both, and then basically shot for the center of those 2 lines. And then that was my center point. From there, measured 6 inches out from that middle line both directions and put a tick mark at every 6 inches as I went along. So to form the grid, the tick mark is going to be the center of this piece that's going to be running in the opposite direction. This is almost 3/4 of an inch. I need to measure a 3/8 inch tick mark on either side of the 6-inch line that I just made. After doing that, I can then take a square and draw a line on those tick marks that are on either side, and I will end up with a nice little square box where this is going to land. If this is too much math for you, just go ahead and and measure out your 6-inch tick marks, and then you can kind of eyeball, okay, this sort of looks like it's going to be somewhere around here. It doesn't have to be perfect. You can go and make yourself a little template so that you know where each one of the squares land and do it that way. You want to mark everything out in graphite just in case you make a mistake. And then just having some basic rubbing alcohol and a piece of paper towel. As you can see, I did make a mistake. If you do make a mistake, you just take a little bit of that rubbing alcohol and run it over that line. It will lift up some of the paint a little bit, but not so much that it's that big of an issue, and it will at least take up enough of the graphite so that you don't mistakenly place something in the wrong spot. So this one I'm going to do a little bit different because I have 4 pieces going on. I don't really have that center point at 6. I've marked all of this out, and now I'm going to lay out the grid at all of these spaces, and hopefully we're okay and I can start screwing this thing together. I'm not quite awake yet. I've only had a half a cup of coffee. I need to drink more, or this is going to turn into another one of those days. I tipped up the pencil tick marks facing me just slightly on the side so I could figure out where the layout's going to go, and then I can tip it down and begin my screwing. These are only 3/8 of an inch thick, so you want to make sure that you're using 1-inch screws. I am countersinking so that I can go back and fill everything. That is just something I do for the aesthetics of the whole thing. It is not necessary if you don't mind looking at the screws. I have these tick marks at each point, and that is what I'm using as my reference. If you meet any screw resistance, when I put that in, it kind of raised off of the bottom piece and there was a gap. You just reverse the screw and then re-drive it back in, and it should seat itself. See, it kind of got that gap, so if I reverse it, there we go. Alright, now I'm going to start to install the outside frame, and so I'm going to put on the top and the bottom first. So I'm going to take one of my 1x2s that I have cut that are the same width, and I'm going to just slide it under here, even it out so that I can get my tick marks. There. I will know where I'm screwing. I'm going to go ahead and sink a screw in at the top of each end. Now, these guys are a bit longer because you're going into the end grain, so you could get away with using 1 1/4 inches. And I think I'm going to do that just because it'll add some extra strength. Okay, gonna repeat that whole process for the opposite side. Alright, the next thing I need to do is get the other sides on. And at the top of my arbor, I have a 9-inch gap in between where the grid ends and where it goes up and over to the top part. I'm gonna just go ahead and grab my long ones here. And I wanna make sure that when I screw these on, my pointed end are both facing the same direction. I'm gonna line them up from the top because if it is a miscut and it's off by a little bit, that end's going to be buried in the ground, so no one's going to see it. I'm going to go ahead and measure 9 inches from the top. My piece is going to sit just under that 9 inches. And I'm going to cast a measurement from the top of this to the bottom, just so that I can have a reference point to line it up with. I am definitely using the 1.25 inches here because this is my main structure. I want to make sure it's good and strong. And I'm going to pop in 2 screws at each side. Once I put the 2 sides on, I went ahead and flipped it over so that the shorter part of the grid is facing upwards because I'm going to go ahead and secure these, and it's just much easier for me to get it flush with it facing me. I can manipulate this up and down however I need to, just to make sure that I get them pretty on point. And I'm not going to bother with trying to deal with any tick marks at this point because the grid's kind of locked where it is. So wherever it falls, I'm just going to eyeball my center point and drive 1-inch screw through all of them, and I'm going to do that for both sides. Okay, so all that's left for this one side is for me to go in and fill the holes and then sand them down and touch those up after the holes dry. To speed up my process, I generally like to use spackle when I'm doing painted pieces. So I'm just going to use basic drywall spackle. Before I do that, let me just show you what it looks like. Each arbor is going to require 2 of these sides. So in my case, I'm going to be repeating this entire process 3 times because I am building 2 arbors. This is also a great way to make a very sturdy trellis. If you don't want to use the garden wire, you could most certainly just have one side and this become a functioning trellis. Okay, this is the magic of using spackle instead of using wood filler. I just have a damp cloth. I'm just very lightly going over it with this damp cloth, and now I don't need to painstakingly sand. I'm going to start installing these sides so I can get them out of my way in my work area. There's basically 3 pieces to this arbor, 2 sides and 1 top. I'm going to be pulling out the existing posts so that I can use this point as an anchor, and I'm going to avoid the massive mounds of ants that we have in this mulch. Alright, if you are on the East Coast, black ants do not bite. These guys bite, okay? That's why I'm freaked out about them. That's it. The entire show is basically you watching me fight with ants. If you are trying to build a freestanding arbor, you can wait for the 2 sides and assemble it as one piece. But I found out here in the garden, it was much easier since I'm attaching them to these beds to install my 2 sides first and then go ahead and put on the top of the arbor. Alright, it is time to move on to making the tops. Now I did the same process with these where I taped them together, made sure I got a clean cut so all of my pieces were even. Fortunately, the tops for me, because of my width, I ended up with needing 5 pieces of each, and the benefit of having the odd number, the center point cross beam is going to match, made it really easy to do my measurements, and from there I went and divided the space into what was close to 6 inches. Go on with building the grid for the top, and the top is a very similar grid except that it's a little bit more of a square rather than this rectangle that we did for the sides. To map out my larger pieces here, first thing I did was figure out what the center point was, and I just put in a line here. Now the other thing is that I know that my piece is going to rest just flush at this bottom edge, but this is an undercut from part of that pattern that I did, so I need to draw on some kind of a straight edge. So I just have a bare piece of board here, and I'm going to match that up. I'm going to give myself some guidelines. Just kind of set this up here. Once you have that on the guide edge, draw yourself boxes around where it's going to go, and then once you have that template marked out, you can go ahead and begin assembling it. Well guys, that wraps up another video. Please like, share, and subscribe if you have not done so already, and I hope to see you soon. Let's see how bad the damage is. 3 times because I'm building. Can you see me?